By the year 2018, the 18-year-old Vladislav Igorevich Rosyakov was in his 4th year at the Kerch Polytechnic college and was not very comfortable at the institution. He had even gone so far as to say that he hated it deeply, a statement that, on its own, did not attract much attention. And the truth is, it was never unusual for underachieving teenagers to show contempt for their schools. What was a bit more unusual was another strong statement that Vladislav had made to a friend. In a stern tone, he had sworn that sooner or later he would get revenge on his teachers. If someone had truly taken this seriously, maybe this hell could have been avoided, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Why is this massacre known as the Russian Columbine? What were the motives that drove the killer to commit this terrible attack? Is it true that another boy became obsessed with this attacker and just a few months later tried to replicate the massacre? Well, to answer these and other questions, we need to go back to October 17, 2018, the day the Kerch Polytechnic massacre happened. In this case, Vladislav left warnings about what he was going to do, but this doesn't always happen. That's why it's very important to pay attention to different threats, both physical and virtual, and that's what Surfshark is for. Surfshark is a virtual private network, better known as a VPN, that keeps our information and all the content on our devices safe, because it allows us to encrypt our data, even when we connect through public Wi-Fi networks. With Surfshark, we can also change our virtual location, which allows us to access different benefits such as finding better deals on international flights, or unlock the 15 global Netflix libraries and use streaming services like British Broadcasting Corporation iPlayer, Hulu, and other platforms that are restricted in various countries. And if that wasn't enough, Surfshark also has the Surfshark One version, which includes very useful features like antivirus, alert, and search, providing even more security. If you want to follow my advice and start using Surfshark, I'll leave the link down below in the description. It's the one you see here on the screen. It's surfshark.com/LDAK, or at the end of your purchase you can use my code, which is LDAK, and you'll get 4 extra months. And also you have a 30-day guarantee to use Surfshark. If at the end of these 30 days you decide not to use it, you can request a refund so you're not taking any risk. Download it, use it, and then let me know how it went. Let's begin. Vladislav Igorevich Rosyakov was born on May 2, 2000 in Kerch, a city on the Crimean Peninsula that at that time was part of Ukraine. Sadly, he was only 10 years old when he began to suffer a life full of abuse. His father suffered a head injury that caused him a disability, which led him to excessive alcohol consumption. That's when the ordeal began. The man started abusing little Rosyakov as well as his mother and other relatives. When the boy was old enough to start his studies and entered a local school, it was not unexpected that his performance was poor, something common among young people raised in these environments of domestic violence. In social settings, he didn't show great skills either. In fact, he had very few friends. That's why he spent most of his days playing video games and also developed an early obsession with weapons. As a teenager, at the age of 15, a new interest caught his attention. He wanted to train as an electrician, so he enrolled at a university in the Kerch Polytechnic College. At that institution, he also began to develop other hobbies. To his already known attraction to weapons, he added an unusual interest in explosives. In fact, disturbingly, he even began bringing them to class. A bayonet knife, that is, a type of multifunctional knife that, although designed for hand-to-hand combat, can also be attached to a rifle or a gun. The incidents didn't take long to happen. Very soon, and without any warning, the boy sprayed pepper spray in the middle of a class. The act caused surprise and alarm among those present, who couldn't understand the reason behind his behavior. It was of little use to ask him why he had done it. Despite the chaos he caused, he didn't bother to provide any justification for his actions. Alarmed and upset, his mother decided to take action about it. She drastically reduced his already limited social interaction, checked his pockets vigorously and constantly, and forbade him from activities like going to the movies or using a computer. It wasn't until the following year, when the boy turned 16, that the woman lifted this last restriction. On his social media, the boy made sure to spread various messages. He used to complain, For example, about other people's ignorance and the lack of purpose he felt in his life, but that wasn't all. He was also an active member of multiple online communities, focused on closely related topics, such as serial killers and mass murderers. In particular, he was a full-fledged Columbiner. What does this mean? That he was a staunch fan of the Columbine massacre, the famous school shooting that happened at the end of the 90s at Columbine High School in the United States, which left a toll of 13 dead. Columbiners usually study, glorify, or even identify with the perpetrators of the sinister attack, Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris. This wasn't something the young man kept strictly secret. On more than one occasion, he had confessed to his friends that he found the idea of thinking about a massacre exciting. Unfortunately, no one took this seriously either. Shortly after reaching adulthood, Vladislav obtained a permit to carry hunting weapons. He had successfully passed the necessary psychological tests, submitted medical reports, completed the required legal training on firearms safety, and provided all the requested documentation. Without wasting a second, he began to regularly attend a shooting club. And on September 8, 2018, he acquired a shotgun. On October 13th of that same year, he went to a gun shop and legally bought a total of 150 bullets. There were only 4 days left before the young man's obsession with Columbine reached its peak. And that's how our story goes back to the beginning. On October 17, 2018, Vladislav Igorevich Roslyakov, 18 years old, arrived, like every day, at the Kerch Polytechnic College. He did so around 11:40 in the morning, entering through a hidden door that avoided the main metal detector and carrying 2 bags. He was also wearing a peculiar outfit that somehow resembled that of a certain well-known killer, whom the young man idolized, Eric Harris. Vladislav was wearing black pants and a white t-shirt with a word that reflected his growing resentment, the word hate, written in his language, Russian. In his hands, he carried an even more unsettling item, a 12-gauge Hudson Escort and guard pump action shotgun with an 8-round capacity. With a pistol grip, a high-powered weapon designed for close combat. The calm of that school morning was shattered by the deafening burst of a hail of gunfire. The screams and panic of teachers and students followed immediately. Most of them began to throw themselves into the hallway in desperation. Other students tried to escape by jumping out the windows. Meanwhile, Roslyakov calmly walked through the institute, killing 2 teachers along the way with point-blank shots. From time to time, he aimed his bullets at any other living being that crossed his path, and for no apparent reason, also at computers, doors, and fire extinguishers. After 15 minutes of a fierce shootout, just like at the beginning of the aforementioned Columbine massacre, the attacker prepared to detonate a homemade device in the cafeteria. The brutal explosion destroyed walls, doors, and windows, reaching several unfortunate students in its uncontrollable fury. Not satisfied with this, Vladislav placed several devices at different points on the campus. When there was only 1 bullet left, the young man chose his last victim. Emulating his idol once again, Eric Harris, he headed toward the library. In this room, he took his own life with a shot to the head. Outside the Kerch Polytechnic College, the horror continued among the victims. About half an hour after the attack, firefighters and a group of 200 soldiers sent by the Russian armed forces arrived at the scene. Finally, ambulances arrived with urgent medical assistance. An emergency protocol was also activated, and 4 planes were deployed to evacuate the wounded. In addition, nearby military hospitals were prepared to receive the victims. Witnesses to the horror who were in the courtyard described how, in addition to the sounds of gunfire, they also heard the explosions of bombs. What they had seen was even worse. Blood covered the walls, blackboards, and the floor. The devices that didn't go off were deactivated. Tragically, the one that did explode caused devastation. Several students had to have parts of their bodies amputated to increase their chances of survival. The media also arrived quickly. The first images broadcast on television showed the victims being evacuated from the school in all kinds of improvised vehicles such as public transportation and buses. Not counting the death of the perpetrator, the massacre left a total of 20 dead and nearly 70 injured. Of the 20 fatalities, 5 were teachers and 15 were students. 10 of them were under 18 years old, and the youngest were just 15. At first, the investigative committee of Russia classified the attack as an act of terrorism. In fact, several Russian politicians and media outlets suggested that the perpetrators could be Ukrainian saboteurs, attributing responsibility for the events to that country's government. As many know, there were strong disputes between both countries over the Crimean Peninsula. In this context, the then president of Ukraine, Petro Poroshenko, expressed his condolences to the victims of the tragedy, making it clear that for him, they were Ukrainian citizens. Finally, the attack was reclassified as mass murder. But what had motivated the perpetrator to commit such an act of violence? His ex-girlfriend stated on a Russian channel that Vladislav was a victim of bullying. According to the young woman, the boy had told her that he had lost trust in people since his classmates started humiliating him for not being like the others. He later confessed to her that he had lost the will to live and intended to take revenge on his aggressors because of it. Despite the gruesome crime he committed, the girl insisted that he was a good and sensitive boy. Later, an improvised monument was set up in front of the school, where residents and survivors placed flowers and toys in memory of the victims. 2 days after the massacre, during the farewell to the deceased, 17 closed coffins were arranged in the central square of Kerch with their families by their side. Around 20,000 citizens came to pay their last respects in an emotional public ceremony that featured photos of all the victims, photos that showed them all smiling and radiating their joy. Because as the families explained, that's how they wanted their loved ones to be remembered. The tragic event not only left a mark on the community, but also caused a great wave of repercussions, both nationally and internationally. Immediately after the massacre, thousands of people gathered all over Russia and in several countries to pay tribute to the victims. The Prime Minister of Crimea, Sergei Aksyonov, declared a 4-day mourning period. Reactions to what happened came quickly and were very diverse. Russian political analyst Sergei Mikheyev, during a broadcast on state television, blamed Western subculture for the attack, arguing that it promoted a mentality based on the cult of violence. He plainly and simply blamed the United States for its influence in this area. For his part, Russian President Vladimir Putin blamed globalization and access to the internet. He also focused on the United States. According to his words, it all began with the tragic massacres in schools in the American giant, made worse by the inappropriate content that young people accessed through the internet. The leaders of several countries expressed their condolences to the victims of the attack, among them Armenia, Estonia, Finland, Germany, Italy, Thailand, the United Kingdom, and Venezuela. The event was dubbed by various media outlets as the Russian Columbine, a name by which October 23rd was immortalized in history. Controls were implemented at the entrances of the Polytechnic school to verify the identity of each person, and the students resumed their classes after 6 days without activities. For everyone's peace of mind, the Rostov regional office of the Russian Ministry of Emergencies reported that after confirming it through an inspection, the building was free from the danger of collapse. Later, the British journalist Stephen Rosenberg pointed out that this fact should not be surprising, since during that same year there had been several attacks in Russian schools, which had resulted in several children being injured. An article from the British newspaper The Telegraph supported this, indicating that in 2018 there were at least 6 attacks in educational institutions in the country, although none of them were carried out with high-caliber weapons. On May 28, 2019, just a few months after the tragedy in Kerch, a new tragedy, which was closely linked to it, would once again shake Russian society. The Columbine Effect is a term used to describe the influence that the original Columbine massacre had on culture in general, and particularly in the series of subsequent school attacks, mainly in the United States. It represents a phenomenon in which certain individuals, inspired by the shooting carried out by Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, have tried over the years to replicate it in their actions. This happened through threads, the creation of the aforementioned online communities that glorify the perpetrators, and even by carrying out chillingly similar attacks. Examples of this were the shooting at Red Lake High School, the one at Virginia Tech, and the one at Sandy Hook. In all these cases, the investigations found material related to Columbine and its perpetrators, and in some, the attackers even openly expressed their fascination with the massacre. The case of Vladislav Roslyakov, for all the reasons already mentioned, was another clear example of the Columbine effect. But what the deceased teenager probably never imagined was that the massacre he committed would go on to inspire others, just as the original one had once inspired him. Yes, he himself would become the figure that a new attacker would idolize. A 15-year-old Russian student named Daniil Polkin became deeply interested in the story of Vladislav. So much so that on May 2, 2019, during Roslyakov's birthday, the young man posted a photo of the deceased killer with the text, "You inspired thousands of kids all over the country. Happy 19th birthday." 26 days later, Daniel was ready to commit his own crime. That morning, he arrived at the place where he studied, school number 4 in the village of Bolshevik, in Bolk's Saratov region, Russia. He was carrying a backpack like all the other students, except his didn't contain the usual school supplies the others carried. Instead, it held an axe and 2 bombs, Molotov. The teenager was also wearing a black t-shirt with the word "disappointment" written in red, an outfit that was a clear reference to the one worn by Roslyakov. On the day of his attack, the boy walked with apparent determination to a classroom on the 2nd floor of his school. From there, his plans did not go at all as he expected. The Molotov cocktail, which he threw first, didn't work. Then he threw another one, which also failed to ignite. That's when he crossed paths with the 12-year-old student Daria Kozlova. Dalila attacked her, hitting her on the head with his axe before dropping the weapon and fleeing in terror toward his home. From that moment on, it was all regret. The frustrated attacker began recording videos in which he claimed to regret what had happened. "I couldn't do it. I hurt a girl. I don't even know her name. Now I want to take my own life. I'm very scared. I regret what I did. I'm not like this. I don't know what happened to me. I want to offer my sincerest apologies." Those were some of his words. Then, he sent an audio message to his friends in which he said that he thought killing someone would be very easy, but that it was actually hard for him to handle. Pulkin couldn't carry out the last part of his plan either, to take his own life at the school, emulating his idol. An hour after the incident, he was found by the police and arrested. His victim, Daria Kozlova, was hospitalized with a severe traumatic brain injury. She managed to survive, although she lost the vision in one eye as a result of the attack. On August 4, 2020, Daniil Pulkin was sentenced to 7 years in a juvenile detention center. In addition, a compensation payment of 1 million rubles was ordered to be paid to the mother of the assaulted minor. The so-called Russian Columbine left a deep mark on society and a significant legacy in terms of school security, mental health, youth, and the impact of social networks on young people. The tragedy once again exposed a series of social and psychological factors, some of the most concerning, that seem to reflect a growing crisis among young people. It also confirmed that armed violence in educational institutions is not a problem exclusive to one region or country, but a global phenomenon that requires a coordinated response, collaborative solutions, and above all, our full attention. Where does this lack of expectations and this hatred for others come from? Why do more and more boys and girls see the possibility of taking out their frustration on their surroundings as a possible way out? At what point did educational institutions go from being a place of support to becoming the breeding ground for some minds to fall into a desperate spiral of death and destruction? For now, only one thing is certain: as long as these questions remain unaddressed as they deserve, the future will continue to be stained with the blood of innocence.